Hi guys, welcome back to my channel and welcome to today's video where I am going to walk you through my process of colour picking for black fur. This is something that you guys always ask me about, and I've previously done a black fur tutorial with coloured pencils showing you the kind of stages and step by step, but I've never actually gone into detail or depth about my colour picking process. So that is what I'm going to show you guys today. The reference photo that I'm using for this is taken from Pixabay. I just did a little search. I searched for black cat eyes and this is one of the ones that came up. And this is like a little bit of a Halloween tutorial special for my Club Puffin and Patreon subscribers. And you guys on YouTube are going to get the full real-time tutorial next week. So this video today is in preparation for next week's video and is also going to be really useful to you guys because it is probably the #1 asked question on my channel. So if you haven't done so already, make sure you hit subscribe and tick that bell notification as well so that you can be prepared for the release of that real-time tutorial next week. So without further ado, let's get into colour picking for black fur. Okay, so as you guys can see, I have my reference photo up on my Photoshop. So I'm using Photoshop software to show you this demonstration, but you don't need Photoshop or anything like really expensive like that in order to do this particular method of the colour picking. You can use something like Paint, or you can use GIMP or any of those kind of other free photo editing softwares. There's also an app called Artie which you can get on iOS, which you can use to pick colours as well, which is helpful, which you can put onto your tablet. So if you don't have an actual desktop computer, perhaps you just have a mobile device or you have a tablet, then you can download different apps, and there's also different photo editing apps that have a colour picker and you can use those as well. But the kind of method and everything that you're going to use for this is the same. So we're not going to really focus on too many colours within the eye for this specific walkthrough for you guys. What we're going to focus on is the black fur. So usually when people look at black fur, they just kind of imagine that you're going to use like the dark colours, and they don't necessarily consider like all of the undertones. So this is what we're going to look at today. So obviously we do have some dark colours. We're going to obviously need to pick some black, we're going to need to pick dark sepia, and just as a heads up, all of the colours that I'm picking are from the Faber-Castell Polychromos range. So if you have that set, this is what I'm using to pick my colours. So what we need to do in order to pick the undertones is use a colour picker on our photo editing software. So on Photoshop, that's located on the left hand side down the bottom here. You can just click on these little squares down here and up pops this little colour box, and you can use the eyedropper and you can select your different colours. Now, if you look really closely at this particular reference photo, you'll identify that you've kind of got these lighter areas and you've got the darker areas. Now these lighter areas are what we're going to use to find those undertones. And usually you have black fur and it's either warm or cool toned, or a mixture of both. And in this case it's a mixture of both. And we can identify the way that it's warm or cool by looking at those lighter areas. So you can see on this reference you've got a lighter area above the eye here where you've got some whiskers that are highlighted. That's where we can see some undertones, and also in the kind of like the corner of the eye, that's where we can see some lighter patches of the skin underneath, and just anywhere where you can see the kind of light hitting the fur, that's where we're going to be able to identify whether it's warm or cool toned, and that's going to directly correlate to the colours that you're going to use underneath your darker colours. So let's look at the top bit in the whiskers above the eye first. So what we can do is use the eyedropper tool, and you can pick out some of the lighter tones, and as you can see it's changed on my little colour swatch area here, and we can see that it's given us this really kind of dark, almost blue grey colour, and we can see on this line going up the side of this big coloured block, you can see a scale of going from red all the way through the colour of the rainbows all the way back down to red again. And we can see that these little icons here are located in the blue spectrum. So immediately we know that this area is going to have a blue undertone. And we can just select various other areas as well, and you can see how it changes depending on where you select. This one is located in like the sort of yellowy orange area, and obviously that's indicating that there is a slightly warmer tone, so you're going to be using some slightly warmer colours underneath your darker colours. And if we just select a few different hairs, you can see it pops back to blue, where you have the cooler tones, and just kind of click around and you can kind of see how that strip along the edge of that big square there is changing. As you can see, you've kind of got this circle down here, and it's all located in these dark areas because it is black fur. You're going to obviously need to use dark colours. But this area, this little bar up the side here, which indicates the kind of spectrum of the colour, is what you need to look at when identifying whether an area is cool or warm. So if you're not sure when looking directly at a reference photo whether or not it is cool, whether or not it's warm, use a colour dropper or a colour picker like this to identify that for you, because I know that it can be quite difficult to immediately look at an image and decide whether it's warm or cool. And the way that you decide, as I mentioned briefly, whether you decide whether it's warm or cool is based on whether it is like more of a blue tone or more of a red or orange tone. So this bit again, if you click around here, we try and get some sort of blue tone. Even purple is considered as a cooler tone, so if you're getting like purpley blues, even like a kind of cyany green, that tends to be that you need to use some cooler tones underneath your dark areas. And if you're kind of more venturing into like the pinks, oranges, that kind of area, that's warmer. So if we pick down the bottom of the eye now, we can see that if we just select around here, most of the areas that we're selecting down here are located in this kind of reddy orange area. So all of this area down here is warm. And I always find that once you kind of know what an area is in terms of like warm or cool tones, you can then immediately see it on your reference photo and you think to yourself, why did I not think or pick that up when I very first looked at the image? And the more that you colour pick your references in this way, the more you get used to picking with a colour picker and identifying that in your mind and then looking at your reference photo and then seeing that in reality, the more you're going to get used to actually seeing that before going in with the colour picker, and you're eventually going to not need to use a colour picker or anything like that in order to get the right colours for your drawings. So we have identified the warm and cool tones, so what kind of colours would we need to use underneath that? Because when you're using a colour dropper like this, it isn't immediately obvious what kind of lighter tones you need to add underneath. And a lot of people think that you don't necessarily need to add lighter tones underneath your black fur because a majority of it is just going to be black. But that is completely wrong thinking. You still need to go in with your lighter base layers. As you can see, you've got these areas of highlights. So going in with your lighter colours first, when you go back in with your final layers with your darker colours, these lighter tones are going to shine through in those highlight areas. So it is really important and necessary to get those lighter colours in first. So my very first layers that I usually put down are usually either a warm or cool grey, and people often ask how you decide whether or not to use warm or cool grey, and it's exactly as I just explained when going through and picking the colours in this upper area and this lower area. It depends on what kind of colours are popping up in the colour picker, whether they are more sort of blue in tone or red in tone. In the blue toned areas, I'm obviously going to use a cooler grey. So what I tend to use is a cold grey one from the Polychromos. And in the warmer areas, I would use a warm grey one in the Polychromos. There are some times when you can kind of merge those two colours together, like in the area of the upper eye here. So as we was picking the colours in the sort of whisker area, we were getting areas of blue tone, blue undertones, and areas of orange undertones. So that would be an example of where you would combine your two base layers to create a kind of warm cool effect. They kind of cancel each other out and they act as a really nice base for your darker colours as well. So We've identified the lightest tone that we need to use because that is a really obvious one. It tends to be the really lightest tones in your coloured pencil kit. Now we need to decide on some of those blue, some of those cool tones and some of those sort of red and warmer tones to go underneath our dark colours. So what I tend to do, because it's not really obvious when picking on black fur what kind of tones you need to use, I just kind of use a little bit of knowledge and pick more kind of earthy kind of tones for the warmer areas. The warmer areas I think are a lot easier to pick for your next layers before you go in with like your dark sepia and your black. So what I tend to pick for this is just kind of use my eyedropper here and try and find some nice tones, some nice kind of orange earthy tones, and then I just kind of pick tones that that are showing within this large box. So I'm just going to switch displays for you guys so I can show you the other method and tool which I use when it comes to colour picking. So this is another tool which I use, and these are my coloured pencil charts. I've previously made a video for you guys explaining exactly how I make these, and I'll leave a link to that below so you can make some yourself, because these are an invaluable tool and one which I use when colour picking. So we're trying to pick some sort of mid-tones for the warmer toned area on the black fur. So I said that I really kind of want to use like natural tones, some kind of natural oranges, natural reds and that kind of thing, because it lends itself really well to animals and to fur. So we're going to go to our sort of natural tones here. And a lot of orange tones were popping up as the kind of undertone to that black fur, so we can go straight to our sort of orange area, and these are the colours which we can kind of see are in that kind of area. So we have some burnt ochre, terracotta, light yellow ochre, sanguine. All of those would be good to use for the undertones of your black fur. So what you would do is layer down your warm grey 1, then you can go in with like a yellow and then build up to a sort of dark orange, maybe some sanguine for a really nice rich dark fur, and then what you do on top of that is go in with your dark sepia and your black pencils and then build up that really dark tone. Now when you are putting down your mid-tones, you might think that it's a little bit kind of a moot point to add in these kinds of colours and then go over with a lot of dark sepia, but when you add your dark sepia over the top of these and you see these tones shining through, it's going to transform your black fur and it's going to give it a whole nother dimension, and you're going to be really amazed and grateful that you did actually put these tones down, because when you just add a base layer and then you add dark sepia over the top and then black, it ends up looking really flat. So adding these kinds of tones really gives your piece some extra dimension. So when it comes to the more kind of cooler toned areas, what we're going to be picking is blue, because as you saw in the little box preview on the colour picking on Photoshop, we had a lot of blues pop up. So we can go to the blue section. Now obviously there aren't too many kind of natural looking blues apart from the cold greys, but those cold greys, as you can see here, they're going to be really kind of flat looking. They don't have a lot of like different dimension in terms of their colour. So what we're going to use are the actual blues from the coloured pencil set. So one blue which I really like to use as an undertone, because it's kind of got a little hint of purple and just kind of gives it a little bit extra depth, is Delft Blue. This is one that I really like to use and one which lends itself to a lot of kind of blue undertones on fur. When you are using like your eyedropper or something, you can kind of see sometimes that it drops into like the kind of blue purple range, and that would be a good one to use. Another nice one to use is the Indentrine Blue. That's kind of more of like almost a red toned blue. It's a little bit warmer, and that would be great for kind of areas that are cool with a little bit of warm. So in our case on this reference photo, that would be a good one to use, along with Helio Blue Reddish. That kind of gives it away in the name, that it's kind of got a little bit of red in there and it's a little bit more of a warmer toned colour. What you kind of want to avoid is using any of the kind of really light blues, because they are a little bit pointless to add down. And avoid going too far into the green area, because that can also just kind of turn your black fur a little bit kind of grey in tone. Obviously if you have like some grass reflected and there are green undertones, then obviously add that down, but if your colour picker isn't kind of picking up any green areas, then try and steer away from like this lower half of the blues. You want to kind of stay in this kind of ultramarine, indentarine blue, even dark indigo, and more the kind of like the purpley blues. They are good to add as a base. What I also like to do for my cooler toned fur is to mix the Delft blue with a little bit of the mauve. Adding those two together creates a really lovely tone. So if you layer some Delft blue and then some mauve and then put your dark colours over the top, it creates a really nice look, and those ones really work well together. So that's what I use in addition to picking colours with a photo editing software like Photoshop. But sometimes when you kind of don't feel like you need to use Photoshop or any kind of software, you can just go straight in with your colour charts like this. Now what I usually do is just look straight at my colour chart, look at my reference, and then try and find similar tones. And the way that I do this is that I hold my colour charts up to my computer screen or near the computer screen, and then try and identify, like squint my eyes a little bit and try and identify if I can see any of these tones shining through in the reference photo. So what I usually do is go one swatch at a time. So I just hold my swatch like this up to the computer, move it around, or to my tablet or my mobile, whatever device I'm using. I can move it along various areas of the reference photo and see if I can see any direct matches. So I'm just going to use my phone here for an example. It doesn't have the reference picture on it, but you guys will kind of get the same kind of effect. But I have a reference photo here and I'll just move it along in a particular area and just see if there are any kind of tone matches or anything that I can kind of see pop out when doing this. And this is kind of a really nice, easy way to do it, and it kind of gets you even more used to identifying tones within your reference photo. This method can take a little bit longer, but I feel like it's has a lot more payoff in the long run, because some people, and I myself was prone to this a while ago, or when I started taking commissions and things, I got very reliant on using a colour picker to pick my colours, and I become very unconfident at using my eyes and myself to judge colours. So this is a really good method to use when you're feeling a little bit more confident and you want to kind of branch out from a photo editing software and get used to picking colours with your eyes and really identifying and getting to grips with looking at different colours. So you would just do this with all of your colour swatches. So in like the cooler toned areas, you can take your blues out and you can run those along your reference and see if there are any kind of direct matches. Obviously in some areas it's going to be very light and you kind of just have to use a little bit of judgment to pick the correct colours, and it does take a little bit of practice, but it's a really fun way to do, and you'll be surprised at how quickly you actually pick up this method and become confident at picking your own colours. So just to recap on the steps that you need in order to pick your underlying tones within your black fur. You need to look at the different areas on your reference photo and identify whether they are warm or cool toned, because that will give you a key indicator as to what tones to use and what kind of area on the colour spectrum you need to be looking at. Once you have identified whether an area is warm or cool toned or a mixture of both, you can then pick your base tones, which are going to be your lightest greys. And you would either use a warm grey one or a cold grey one or something similar, and you want to use the lightest colour first. Once you've got that lighter colour down and you've kind of got those areas mapped in that are warm or cool, then you can go in and pick your mid-tones, which are going to lie underneath your dark sepia and black layers. So in your cooler toned areas, these tend to be sort of more blue and purple tones, and in your warmer toned areas they tend to be sort of orange, yellow and red tones, sometimes even brown tones as well underlying there. With those mid-tones of either blues or reds, you're going to start with your lighter colours, so you can pick like a variety of different blues, a variety of different reds. You want to start with the lightest tones and work your way to the darkest, like you would in any kind of coloured pencil drawing. And then once you've finished with your darkest colour of that kind of mid underlying tone, then you're going to go in with your dark sepia and cover most of it up and pay attention to where you have those highlights and where a significant amount of those undertones are actually showing through. And then finally you want to go in with your black coloured pencil if necessary to really darken everything up and add in your final details. Also a reminder that in order to pick whether an area is warm or cool toned, you want to look at the highlighted areas, so where the light is hitting your subject. So look for those highlighted areas and it will become a lot more obvious as to whether or not an area is warm or cool toned. That is my top tip for you guys. Always look at those highlights. And that's pretty much it. It's quite a simple process and there are a few ways of actually processing and going through and doing this, as you guys have seen. And I really hope that you guys have found this tutorial helpful, because it not only relates to like black fur, even though we did use a black fur specific reference picture for this, you can also relate these techniques and these methods into picking for any of your coloured pencil or even any of your arty projects. So if you need perhaps some colours, perhaps you're drawing a hobnob packet with your coloured pencils and you're not quite sure what colour blue and orange and brown to use, you can use these methods to figure that out. So I really hope that you have found this helpful and I hope that you can follow these methods into your everyday arty life. As I said in the beginning, make sure you hit subscribe and that you tick that notification bell so that you can be notified of when the real-time video for the creation of this black cat eye study goes live for you guys next week. And if you can't wait until next week, then you can head on over to my Club Puffin website or to Patreon and you can sign up to the $14 tier or the £10 per month and you can get access to it right now. I'll leave the links to both of those platforms in the description below, along with a link to the reference photo so you can download and have a go at this yourself and get your line art and everything prepared for next week. But that's pretty much it from me today and I will see you guys soon. Bye!